place to be full. What's going on?
You can't hide.
Okay.
Not her again.
Should I show you dinner with kids?
Yeah, I just I just had to get out with no food on me. And yeah, exactly.
How many kids?
I've got a 1.5-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 2
Oh,
girls.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Chit-chatting away. It's all right. I've got 4 girls, but they're all well older than that. Yeah.
Can we have some makeup?
Good evening and a warm welcome to St George's Cathedral for our first, we hope for many years to come, Perth's Big Conversation. Whether you're joining us here in the Cathedral or joining us live on YouTube, welcome. My name's Chris Chataway, I'm the Dean of Perth, and I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the original custodians of the land and waters upon which we gather this evening, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and commit our cathedral community to a meaningful and sustainable path to reconciliation. Our cathedral, in the words of our Archbishop, has served the people of this city and diocese, often standing at the forefront of theological scholarship, liturgical developments, and bringing the voice of the Church to concerns of social and ethical justice to the wider community. It is in this cathedral that in 1925, James Noble became the first Aboriginal man ordained in the Anglican Church in Australia. In 1992, the first group of women ordained as priests in this country took place here. And over many years, theological debates on matters such as the resurrection, alongside the issues of our time for First Nations peoples, the environment, marriage and refugees, have all been examined, considered, and given space to be prayerfully considered. Tonight, we continue this long tradition as we gather with voting already underway on the referendum on the voice to Parliament, and just days before the big day on Saturday. Some of us are decided. Others will still be weighing up the evidence. Yet for others, we might yet change our minds. For whatever position you are coming, you've come to the right place. Don't forget, for those here in the Cathedral, once the panel members have concluded their conversation, then it's over to the audience to ask your questions. But without further ado, let's meet our panel. Jim Morrison is a senior Noongar man and has been an uncompromising activist, advocate and leader in pivotal Aboriginal advancement roles for over 4 decades, working passionately to address the tragic mental health and suicide issues that are a legacy of stolen generations policy. Archbishop Kay Goldsworthy was ordained deaconess in 1984 and deacon in 1986 and served in parishes in Melbourne. In 1988, she was appointed chaplain to Perth College and was among the first women in Australia to be ordained to the priesthood in this place in 1992. Archbishop Kay was the first woman ordained to the episcopate in Australia in 2008. She was elected as the diocesan bishop of the Diocese of Gippsland and installed there in 2015. And finally, Archbishop Kay was elected as the 8th Archbishop of Perth and installed in 2018, the first woman made an Archbishop in the Anglican Church of Australia. Narelle Henry is a proud Noongar woman and leads the Ember team and oversees Ember Connect's operations. A former teacher, Narelle was previously General Manager of Operations at Girls Academy, overseeing the program in 26 schools across Western Australia and Northern Territory. Ember Connect is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander-led collective that elevates Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women to greater possibilities. Dr. Steve Thomas, MLC, has a 25-year history in the Southwest, with 17 years spent in veterinary practice and 15.5 years dedicated to managing his own veterinary hospital in Donnybrook. From 2005 to 2008, he was the member for Capel in the State Parliament of Western Australia, the only person ever to fill that role. His responsibilities for the Liberal Party included those of Shadow Minister for the Environment, Shadow Minister for Planning and Shadow Treasurer. From 2008 to 2009, he was the Principal Policy Advisor to the Minister for Agriculture and Forestry in the Government of Western Australia. Since 2010, until his re-election, he served as the Media and Policy Advisor to Nola Marino MP, the Member for Forest in the Commonwealth Parliament of Australia. Alongside a number of shadow portfolios, Steve is currently Deputy Leader of the West Australian Liberals. And finally, I'm delighted to introduce and welcome Miriam Borthwick, our facilitator. Miriam is an experienced non-executive director, strategic communications specialist, and media relations advisor. She is a former ABC TV News politics journalist and investigative reporter on the 7:30 Report. Miriam is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and currently sits on the boards of Healthway, Rocky Bay, Hale School and Rowing WA's Making Waves program for disadvantaged youth. Dear friends, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel.
Thank you, Dean, and welcome everyone. It's lovely to see you here tonight and to welcome those who are watching via YouTube. Tonight we're going to discuss the issue of the referendum, which is only on Saturday. And so I thought I would actually just begin with reading the very few words which you will find on your ballot paper, which are: write yes or no on a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? That is all that is written on the paper. And I just thought, because there has been so much that has been discussed in this campaign, that it was good to remind ourselves of the simple thing that we are voting on. So since the referendum was announced, there has been robust debate, some of it civil, some of it less so. There has been advertising, there has been misinformation, there have been distractions, but also heartfelt emotions, as well as political jockeying and power plays. Without doubt, emotions have run very high. And with all that in mind, I'd like to ask everyone here tonight to remember that we are here to hold a respectful conversation. Archbishop Kay, I would love to start with you, as we are in the Cathedral. Has the Anglican Church taken a position on the voice?
The Anglican Church has made several statements, which are, some of which are very clearly yes statements, some of which are a little less clearly that, but inviting people to take seriously what it is that the invitation that is being made to us puts forward. So General Synod, which is a meeting of Anglicans from across the country last year, invited people to take seriously and to think seriously about how we can respond. NATSIAC, which is the National Anglican Torres Strait Islander Council for the Anglican Church of Australia, has made a very strong statement in support of the yes for this referendum. The bishops' meeting, the bishops from around the country who met in March this year, have again made a statement which is very positive and invites people to take seriously how it is that they are going to come to their own decision, recognising that, that while we may have perspectives, that there will be people who may not see things quite the same way as everyone. Last year in the Diocese of Perth, we passed a motion at our synod meeting, which was a statement in support of a voice, the voice referendum and saying yes. So there's been some fairly clear statements made across the country.
Right. Jim, you must be one of the longest serving leaders in Indigenous, on Indigenous issues and in the Indigenous people. And you've also always been a strong advocate for the stolen generations. And from that perspective, how do you see the voice helping?
Look, this requires a bit of, well, lots of words, I think. And I'm reminded the last time I was in this church, it was in June '96, at the funeral of a good mate of mine, Rob Riley, who was stolen and brought up in an orphanage, Sister Kate's. And he wasn't an orphan, but also just around the corner, 50 years prior, my father returned from the war in 1946 and stolen generation person, along with his mother, who was stolen from Peak Hill Station up near Meekatharra. So when we say generations, I think we need to be clear. But in 1946, in his uniform, Dad went with 3 of his army mates to the little bar across the road, and he wasn't allowed to be served in his uniform. The police arrived and they put a pound on the bar and said, "Serve these gentlemen." So the history of stolen generation goes back a long way, and I think for a voice, you look at what took place in 1997, and the late Rob Riley was very instrumental in the Bringing Them Home report that was tabled on the 26th of May 1996. So for me, you know, there's been many voices, many reports, and limited action.
So do you see this one having more potential to have a better outcome?
Well, I think from a point of view, there's been 4 voices prior to this one being envisaged, and that was 50 years ago. Somebody said 40 years ago. 50 years ago, myself and Rob Riley were instrumental in setting up the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee, which didn't last long, and you know, all these voices have been driven by government. So for me, the big difference is the Uluru Statement and allowing us to have a voice, or promoting us to have a voice, and to hopefully change things for us, because government hasn't been able to do that, you know, and we talk about the gaps and so I think, yes, for us to be able to determine our own destiny and speak for programs that are important to us, it's vital, because we can't go on doing the same old, same old. I think that's the definition of insanity. Let's change the narrative and look at what we can do better for our people together. And that's a win-win for all of us.
Steve, one of the major criticisms of The Voice has been that it won't close the gap. Do you think that's the case?
Yes, I think unfortunately everybody's expectation has risen, and I actually agree with Jim. There's lots of good things in what Jim said, so he's absolutely right. There have been a number of voices that have come along, and it started with Gough Whitlam back in the 70s, and there was a version under Malcolm Fraser, and then there was that was got rid of by Bob Hawke, and then Bob Hawke put his version in place, and then there was another version after that, and I could tell you all the names, but we don't need to go there. So there's been half a dozen different versions, and I think that the story that's been told that this version will suddenly change things where other versions haven't been able to is misleading everybody, unfortunately. And I'm a great believer, so I think everybody believes, nearly everybody believes, that we have to do something about Aboriginal disadvantage, that we have to empower Aboriginal people to be a bigger part of the economy, to have the same sort of benefits, etc., that everybody else has, that their lifespan should be brought as evenly as possible. All of those things, I think, no matter what side of politics you're on or what part of the debate, unless you're in one of the extremes, we all think that's the outcome that we need to work towards. It is just that the Anthony Albanese version of The Voice is not the solution that everybody thinks it is. It is not the thing that lifts people up, unfortunately. And unfortunately, I'm sitting in front of you and I'm not an Aboriginal person, and I wish it was Jacinda Price or Warren Mundine or someone who was. And they speak fluently and passionately about the need to lift them up, have Aboriginal people lift Aboriginal people up themselves, and that an alternate bureaucracy is not the solution that delivers that. And as Warren Mundine gave an excellent speech a week or so ago, where he said he's often in Canberra speaking on behalf of Aboriginal people for their benefit. And so he's a voice for Aboriginal people. Jacinda Price is a voice for Aboriginal people. And as he said, there are lots of Aboriginal people in Canberra talking to government about Aboriginal disadvantage and trying to lift Aboriginal people. But they both believe very strongly, as I do, that it's Aboriginal people that lift Aboriginal people, and it happens locally on the ground, probably with the sort of work that Jim's been doing, rather than a political bureaucratic voice in Canberra, which has failed repeatedly, 6 times in the past, has been removed, and by both sides of politics. I mean, one comes in with good intention, and I think this is not a political debate. Both sides of politics are trying to do the best thing for Aboriginal people. But they come in, they see it's not working, they get rid of that one, they put in one that they think might work, and they get rid of that one, and everybody forgets that they're trying to lift from the top. And in fact, it has to happen at the bottom, at the grassroots level, and that's why those of us who are opposed to this particular referendum, think that that's not the solution, that people have been misled, that this is actually the answer.
Narelle, I saw you grimace. What's your experience of when Indigenous people do initiate ideas and advocate for themselves?
I think so many of us have been on the end of working with and relying on programs that are working with our communities and our families, and then only to turn around in a second and see that swept away. And we can probably name a couple of those right off the bat.
So can people hear? No. So, Narelle, I think your mic's up now. Can I ask?
I'll try not to talk into my jacket. There we go.
So what I was asking is, what's your experience of when Aboriginal people do initiate their own ideas and advocate for themselves, which is what I believe the voice is about?
Yep, that's right. With Ember Connect, that was actually born out of a program that was Girls Academy. And for any of you who knew what Girls Academy was, it's an engagement program for Aboriginal girls. We had 46 sites across the country, 3,000 girls. We had 10,000 alumni, 160 staff. Over 100 of those staff were Aboriginal women. And 3 days before Christmas, we got a phone call to say that we no longer would be funded for that at all. And in fact, we were invited previous to that to be able to build on that funding and grow, because the program was so exceptional. Unfortunately, through no, knowledge of ours, as a lot of our Aboriginal women were busy on the ground working with staff and students, that program was washed away, and we had to deal with the grief and trauma of that being gone again. And it was a deja vu for us. So what we did is we realised, well, we can't be in this position anymore where we don't have a seat at the table. And we were recently at a conference, the Foreign Minister at New Zealand said that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're going to be on the menu. And that just keeps ringing in my ears, and I feel like we've been on the menu for a really, really long time. So I got a lot of the Girls Academy staff together, and most of it was just to deal with the grief of what had happened, and to counsel our communities and our students and our alumni through what's happened. And what we realised is that we do have a voice in relation to what we can do on in those programs. And so we built Ember Connect. And because we were able to have an Aboriginal board, we've got Aboriginal leadership, in 1 year, because we've got the investment of Aboriginal women from the very beginning, where they're a part of that creation, and not just the creation, but they're also a part of understanding what kind of data are we going to be collecting, what does our monitoring and evaluation look like when it comes to an evidence-based approach in these programs. So we've gone through the whole layer, and boy, it was really, really hard. I'm a teacher and I'm used to being out and running around, but in that short time where we've created a space for women to have that voice, We've got over 2,800 members in this space that are all ready and willing to help each other. And part of that, part of making sure that we can always be in a situation where we just need to know what's happening with the world, and with what's happening in our communities, what's happening in government. We don't really have the luxury to be complacent with that.
I want to keep moving through some of the main topics which have been part of this campaign, and one of them, Steve, has been the No campaign, saying that the voice would divide the country. Is that something you think?
Oh, I certainly do. Oh, that was a bit loud, sorry. I do, and lots of other people do as well. And I think that it does divide. I think that particularly around the Constitution, so almost everybody who thinks that the voice to Parliament and the executive of government is the wrong solution supports the recognition of Aboriginal people as the first Australians. So if you're genuinely talking just about the recognition, then that's the easy part. That's the part that has the vast majority of support. And it's just a statement of fact, so it's not an argument to be had. It's then about this is very loud. It is then about the bureaucracy that's then presented forward, and absolutely, many of us believe that is a divisive process. That the Constitution is supposed to treat all people equally. It can recognise Aboriginal people, but it's supposed to. So every person is supposed to have an equal ability to be heard. And right now, as my friend Warren Mundine says, Aboriginal people can go to Canberra and be heard in the same way that a white farmer can go and be heard, and a new immigrant can go and be heard. To have a separate system available for a part of the community is not the best outcome. And it will provide a disincentive for genuine reform down the track. And I think it has been misleading. I mean, I enjoyed your story, Narelle. That was really good. But if you were defunded a year ago, roughly? 2020, okay. So there are lots of groups that come and then are funded and then are defunded, and other groups tend to come along as a part of that process. Whether a voice changes that, I think, is a huge question mark. And that's not the solution. I want to see this driven basically from the ground up.
One could argue that was what Narelle was saying, but just on the topic of dividing the country, Jim, what's your thoughts about whether the voice would cause division?
I think it's going to cause division from the word go, when not enough Australians understand their own history. I've just driven back from Albany today, where I had 100 people from Department of Communities hearing what happened around the stolen generations, and the jaws were dropping. Majority of Australians sadly don't know their own history because it's not taught in schools. So therefore, it's easy to say, if you don't know, vote no. So it's divided from the word go, because curriculum doesn't allow for truth-telling. And we're still learning that Captain Cook discovered Australia. So the truth has to be told. So I think it's already divided, and it probably has been divided since the original Constitution, where we're not acknowledged. There's been no treaty. There's been no understanding of the separation then. When my dad returned from the war, all his digger mates were granted land. He wasn't even a citizen, so he had to buy his own land. So it's been separate and divided forever. And then you have the dreadful amount of removal, thousands of children removed, not because they were bad parents, because it was breed out the colour. My mother was born at Noongar Mission. In fact, I'm a second generation Irish person, because her father delivered her the Irish doctor. The moment she was born, because she had white blood, was removed from her family and taken. The whole family was moved to Moore River. So don't tell me about divide. How long have we been divided? You know, our laws help to encourage the apartheid laws. I've been hearing now. South Africans came to Perth. We breed out the colour. I've been in AO Neville's office for the past 8 years. I know all about the breed out the colour policy and how it influenced every other state. So there's been a divide forever. It's going to be a divide moving forward unless we understand the truth. Why should I be responsible for educating anybody who calls on me when it should be part of the system? Why don't they know their history? And why should it be up to First Nation people to educate them? You know, I've been doing this for 50 years. I've got to pull up now and make sure that we do this adequately in the proper way. And for 50 years, it hasn't been proper. I would hazard a guess that I'm probably the most experienced person in all of the voices in this country. In this country. I don't think there's anyone alive that has been involved in all 4 voices. So there's got to be a change. We have been divided for so long. And someday, if we're divided still, gee, I might have to go and live in Ireland and claim my ancestry or go to Mars because I won't feel welcome anymore. It'll be 50 years, that's it. I'll pull up shop and I'm out of here.
Steve, do you want to reply to that description of historical division?
Sure. So, sorry, I'm loud again. I'm not trying to win by volume, I swear. So I think some of the things I agree with Jim. We don't necessarily teach how Aboriginal people were treated from 1788 through to, you know, at least 1967 and the things that still occur on. So, I mean, I have no problem with us discussing and teaching some of the terrible things that happened. I think that's absolutely true. I'd be deeply saddened if there is a no vote on Saturday and people like Jim then give up on what I think is then the next step, which is actually to talk about reconciliation going forward. That's not necessarily this particular version, this particular proposal. So one of the problems in this debate is that everybody's being told, unless you accept and endorse this particular model, this particular proposal, a voice to Parliament and to the Executive, that reconciliation can't occur, that we can't continue to lift Aboriginal people. You have to take this particular model or nothing. And unfortunately, Anthony Albanese has turned this into an all or nothing debate, and that's where that's the bit that I probably disagree with Jim, that I don't think it should be an all or nothing debate based on this particular vote and this particular outcome. If Australia votes no on Saturday, that doesn't mean that 50% plus of Australians are racist or don't want Aboriginal people to improve their position. It's because they don't accept the model that's been put forward by Anthony Albanese in this particular referendum. And there is more, when you read out the simple sentence, but there is always more to all of this than a simple sentence. It is always more complicated than that. It will come with its own set of legislation. There'll be rules debated in Parliament. There'll be regulations. There'll be a budget applied to it. There'll be a whole process that goes along with it. And if it doesn't get up on Saturday, it will be because the majority of people in Australia, not because they said they don't want equality or they don't want reconciliation, it will be because they don't want this model of it. And the sad part is, I mean, I would hate for people like Jim and Jim to say, if that's the outcome on Saturday, that's the end of the fight. Because it shouldn't be. It actually should be just the next step.
Narelle, do you want to either respond to that or the other point which has been so strongly made by the No campaign, in addition to that it would divide the country, is that there's not been enough detail?
I think that firstly we need to take it back to what we're actually going to be writing yes or no for, and it's quite simply recognition through a voice. So all of those things around the detail, the model, is then decided by Parliament, not Anthony Albanese. And Anthony Albanese is actually the first one that's listened to us for a really, really, really long time. So this voice, this concept has been coming for not a few years, not 10, not 20, not 30, but I believe the first petition was in 1846. And there have been efforts all the way across the country to try to get to this space because of that division, but it never came to fruition. So it's distressing that this has become a conversation around the fact that, you know, it's an attack on Albanese, but the fact is that these are our words, the Uluru Statement, 250 Aboriginal people that came together for that beautiful and generous invitation. Now, if we look at that invitation, we've put our heart on our sleeve. We are in such a vulnerable position. The thought, and Jim, I know, I've already got my visa opened up on my thing, ready to move to Canada. So the reality is that this is simply what people are voting on is if it's a no, it's going to say a whole lot to us about whether we have a place in this country. And we are from the earth. We have grown from the earth for thousands of years. And all we're asking is recognition through a voice, which is what is symbolic. The voice is what makes it all practical. Because we've seen so many times we've just gone over and over and over this, you know, people trying to give symbolic gestures, and it then gets washed away and it means nothing, and then we don't move forward. So, yeah, in relation to division, I look at my two daughters, and I walk into a school, and the school students all look very much the same, and I know how I grew up. I was the only Aboriginal student in the school that I went to, and I'm still in that space. I'm a teacher, and I'm still in that space where I look around and I go, do my daughters have a place here? Because what we're talking about when it comes to recognition, and being a teacher, you'll know, so Ember Connect also, we talk about the fact that how do Aboriginal women have ownership and agency over their own lives? And a really, really important thing around that is that they've got to see themselves in the environment. They've got to see themselves in different places and spaces, participating, engaging, but also leading and making decisions. Now, my daughters, 1.5 and 5, I walk into a space and I go, firstly, is it safe for me to tell their teachers and this school that they're Aboriginal? Because I know that expectations for my babies will be compromised. That's the way it had always been for me, in everything that I had done in my life. And secondly, are they going to feel like that they are bystanders in a world like I did? And so many of my peers did, and so many of my aunties and uncles and grandparents and greatest grandparents. So are they going to feel like they can actually get in? And if they can feel like they can get in and participate with the world, but the key is, are they seeing enough that they feel like they can get in and affect change in the world? Because that is what agency is, and that is what we're looking for, quite simply.
Narelle, you were talking to me earlier about when you were young and at school, you didn't actually even realise that there were not very many high expectations held of you, and it was actually only when you went to college in America that there were very much high expectations set, and it was just such a contrasting experience. And do you think the voice, which yes, it is about acknowledgement, yes, it is about representation, but do you think it would also set a role model for your daughters that says, we have, as a culture and as a country, expectations of you that we expect you to rise up to? Is that what you were saying?
Well, expectations are important, and I've grown up in a space where expectations have never been present, and it took me moving to the US, where I was free of the label of being Indigenous, that I was then expected, and, well, not expected, but I just had the same expectation to really succeed, just like everybody else. Now, I think growing up in a primary school that I went to, the things that we had learned about my people, it was it was me having to go home and talk to Mum, because it would be really easy for me to develop a really huge, big sense of shame about what that looked like. So what I want for my daughters is to see that they're valued. One, to be seen, and when they speak, to have their voices heard. But isn't that all we want, is to be valued and to be accepted for who we are? And we identify ourselves, we choose our identity, but we've all got a personal responsibility. We don't choose identity for anybody else, but it's our responsibility to make sure that every single one of the people around us belong in this space. And that's what Australians have to do now. We're asking you to say, hey, we're asking you to come on this journey with us. We're putting this out with love and compassion and vulnerability, and it's just quite simply, all we're asking is just to be a part of the world just like everybody else.
Jim, how can the voice represent the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander views? What do you say of the criticism that it would be unwieldy?
I wouldn't mind just commenting on how Steve has conjured up this word racism. If you vote no and you're racist, I don't know where that's come from. What I was attempting to say was, if you don't know, vote no. But if you don't know, find out. And find out what the real issues are facing our people. Walk in our shoes and understand that. So I would never refer to the dominant culture in this country as racist. I wouldn't do that. In the spirit of reconciliation, we have to understand there's truth, justice and healing. We can't have reconciliation if we don't have those three things that were summarised by the Bringing Them Home report, and which is what I spend my time telling people the truth. So to me, I would not label non-Aboriginal people racist, maybe ill-informed, maybe not understanding the issues, walk in my shoes. I think the diversity question, BC, before Cook, there were 250 different language groups in this country, Aboriginal. So there is a diversity that's attempted to be addressed by the 4 different voices. We've learnt a lot since then. So we're not going to be able to speak with one voice. I mean, does the dominant culture speak with one voice? Do you have a Greens or Liberal or Labor or National? Do you speak with one voice? Don't have the expectation that we're going to speak with one voice. I'm Noongar, but I'm Minang from Albany. My mother's Gorang from Bullameel, Bluff Knoll. So we will learn to develop that, but it's not going to take overnight. But don't have the expectations that we speak for each other. There is an amazing diversity of Aboriginal languages in this country. 250 different languages, 750 different dialects. Only 1/3 of those are spoken because we weren't allowed to speak our language. Oh, for goodness sake. So where did that come from? Was that racist? So let's look at how we can deal with the diversity of our people and be proud of how diverse we are. And we can fix that. And that's common sense, developing a relationship, understanding the needs of your brother. What happened to them? I mean, the Royal Commissions in this country have been dreadful for us. Dreadful. The Royal Commission of Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, half the deaths in WA were stolen people. I won't tell you about the other Royal Commissions, but they have all been damning for my people, and particularly those that have been stolen. And my 30 parents who were stolen, they have been impacted every single decade, and still being. We've got to fix that narrative to be able to say what is right for us. I constantly go to government services where they provide a service for Aboriginal people. Oh, there's more Aboriginal people in photos on the wall than Aboriginal staff. That's got to stop. We need to be part of that destiny to look after and support our people because we know the issues. We have the lived experience. I don't have any academic qualifications at all, and honestly, I don't want it. I've lived the life with my parents. I've seen their suffering. I know what is right for them. So diversity is not an issue. Diversity is not an issue. You know, there's 13 groups of Noongar, 3 different languages on Noongar. So diversity is there. We can't help it. But there is in all societies. I can't imagine that you all speak with one voice.
No, and Archbishop Kay, I know at Synod they don't all speak with one voice either.
The clergy are laughing. No, certainly we don't. Our synod, if you're not an Anglican in the room, in the Cathedral, the synod is the gathering of which makes decisions and governance decisions for the life of the church. And we are not of one voice, often not of one voice.
But I also imagine the church has a long history of witnessing and perhaps holding the impact of the multi-generational, all the acts, the laws, the rules which dominated Aboriginal people, which anything from withholding wages, telling people they had to ask permission to marry, curfews, Aboriginal people, of course, the stolen generation and generations, and then they weren't citizens until 67. Is that still playing out in what you see in the church?
It's playing out in various ways in what I see in the church. I mean, Jim spoke of Sister Kate's home, so that's one of the places I think within the laws of the day and government policy of the day, where the church was often an agency which delivered those things. We were perhaps at best paternalistic and at worst abusive. So that's a lived reality. And what we often see in and around our churches is the impact of that generational trauma and generational issues in and around. I think that we are aware of the ways in which, for instance, there is not one Aboriginal priest. There's somebody's puppy. There is not one Aboriginal priest in the Diocese of Perth. And I'm really saddened by that. But when I think of the story of some of the history of how it is that the church oversaw programs, it's perhaps not that surprising. Strangely enough, there is a Noongar priest in the Diocese of Gippsland where I worked, and she's there because she was stolen. And so, and when I came in 2018 and was installed as Archbishop, Phyllis was one of the people who came with me and walked me down the aisle, as it were, to sort of hand me over, and stood with the elders who welcomed me at that time. So all this history that we have, where the work of reconciliation, for ourselves being part of the truth-telling, which is simply really part of our faith understanding, that's one has to go hand in hand with the other. We recognise that we're on a journey, and there's much more journeying for us to go.
There are so many layers to this conversation. The next one, Steve, that I want to come to, of course, anyone who's listened to the debates in the last few weeks have heard the commentary, the variety of commentary about the different legal opinions. Now, none of us here are lawyers, so I'm not asking anyone to step into those shoes. Yes. But we have heard High Court judges past and present saying the voice is not legally binding, so there's not a high risk of recourse, where we've also heard other High Court judges say that there are some concerns. So, but what I wanted to lead to is both Western Australia and South Australia have Indigenous advisory bodies. Western Australian Parliament has had one since 1972. Yes. And do you know if there have been any legal challenges to their recommendations?
There has certainly been dissent, but because those bodies are framed differently, and they're not, for example, in the state constitution, that they don't carry the same weight as the body that would be put in place under the federal constitution if the referendum gets up. So there probably haven't been legal challenges because legal challenges don't apply, but legal challenges will almost certainly apply to the federal voice if a direct voice to government as a bureaucratic process is developed. And you're absolutely right. So lawyers, very esteemed lawyers on both sides of this argument have disagreed. And you're right, Justice French, retired, said there's no issue. But the former governor of Western Australia gave a speech last week where he said it absolutely does, and in fact it's incredibly dangerous, and he was a very highly respected lawyer as well. My piece of advice to everybody is, if the best lawyers in the land can't agree, there's risk involved. And I think that everybody who's, and part of the problem is that you're being told that there's no risk, it's effectively an advisory group that has no power. And the answer to that is, if it has no power, it's not going to achieve anything, because there's been, as we've said before, there's been 6 advisory groups that didn't have direct power before and nothing changed. The change that we're all looking for does not come from an advisory group that has no power. So either, as many esteemed lawyers are saying, on both sides, there's one group that are saying it'll be a powerless advisory group and it will, so therefore potentially it has no impact. Or as others have said, again highly esteemed, that it will have power, that there will be challenges in place and that it will potentially have an impact across the board on all things. Now, Miriam, we're currently, I'm in the upper house of Parliament, we're currently debating the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill repeal. Man, that was a mess. So that was a piece of legislation which, I mean, as Liberals, when we said we actually support the protection of Aboriginal heritage, we got lambasted by some of the more extreme versions in the public who said, you've let us down, and there were rallies, and I got letters to the editor quoting me saying what a terrible Liberal Steve is, because he actually said we support these things. But we did. And we supported it because we believed the government when it said, this won't be terrible. And it was a powerful thing. Like, it was a powerful thing, but they said, you know, it's on the vibe, you can trust us. We'll put the regulations in place, we'll be okay. Now, they came into effect on the 1st of July, and 5 weeks later, the government announced they were repealing the entire thing, throwing it out, and apologising for the overreach and the uncertainty and all those terrible things. And that damaged, and the problem is that damaged both sides of the argument. So for those of us that said, yes, we actually want to assist in protecting Aboriginal heritage, but this isn't necessarily the best model to do it, we were drowned out by some of the more extreme parts of the argument. And you do have to be careful. There are people who, like me, think that we should say no, who are saying some ridiculous things, as there are on the group that are saying yes as well. So if you can remove those two extremes and get to the sensible part of the debate, the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act is a very good example of what happens with overreach. And in fact, we're now further divided in terms of Aboriginal heritage in Western Australia than we ever were, because we got it wrong. Government got it wrong, Parliament got it wrong. We, the Liberal Party, to some extent got it wrong. Maybe we should have fought harder and opposed it a bit more when it was first proposed. Because I've been pilloried for not doing so. And the voice will be a very similar thing. And the problem is that when we didn't know all of the impacts of the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act, as a Parliament and the government, we completely messed it up. But now you've got the voice coming saying, we're not going to explain to you the detail of it. We're not going to tell you all of the technical. Go with the vibe on this. And we're living proof that if you do that, if you're not concerned that the best lawyers in the land are divided on whether this has a negative impact or not, then be cautious. And that's what the sensible part of the No campaign is saying.
I do just need to pause on one thing you just said then about we're not going to tell you the detail on this, because Narelle also earlier did say that that is, the detail will sit after the vote has been made. And the reason, when you look at the Constitution, it might mention defence, but it doesn't mention an army, a navy, or the Air Force. It doesn't mention how many submarines Australia should have. So I think we just need to fact check a little bit there about the process. But Narelle, if we go back to the question on the legal debate which has been happening, is there anything you wanted to say in relation to that?
You know, I am an average citizen who, a lot of the time, a lot of those things sit outside my realm of understanding until now, where I've gone, if I don't figure out these things and tell the story of you know, here is where you get the information, here are the sources that are relevant, here are the sources that are factual, then we've got, I guess, the No campaign taking us beyond what is comfortable for us, thinking, well, now I'm really scared, because that is a no-go territory for me. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I don't practice law. I shouldn't be, you know, I have no idea, but gosh, if they say that it's going to be risky, then I'm really afraid now, and I don't know if I'll vote yes. I've listened to former Chief Justice French a number of times. I've listened to him in person. He doesn't say that this is without risk at all. And I think, you know, the other thing that he mentions is that no good lawyer will ever tell you that anything's a sure thing. And he says that if someone does say that, then get a new lawyer. So in terms of how many, you know, the open letter from, you know, the public and constitutional law professionals, you know, they've all got their names listed. It's really easy to find as well. And so really it's just about going, okay, so here are the people that think that there are risk. But the general consensus among law professionals is that there's nothing that is without risk. But when you think about that risk, the benefits for Australia and for First Nations Australian far outweigh any small risk that will be associated with this. So I don't believe it will clog up the courts. I think there'll be some small things that pop up that would add to the health of our democracy. But aside from that, I tend to refer to the majority of law professionals in the country.
Actually, talking of law professionals, constitutional law expert Professor Anne Toomey, which I'm sure lots of you have heard, listened to her on the radio recently. I heard one line she said yesterday, which I thought was really interesting. She says, when a constitution doesn't evolve and change over time, then there's more likelihood matters end up having to be resolved in the High Court, which is just an interesting perspective as well. But Archbishop Kay, you mentioned that you wanted to really come back to the Uluru Statement from the Heart and talk to it as a spiritual truth in Australia.
And that's how I think many Anglicans have received, and many Christians have received the Uluru Statement from the Heart as an invitation to participate in a spiritual community and reality, and to respond to that. And I think to respond in a way that says, you know, God's been here for an awfully long time, possibly 65,000 years or more. And this statement from the heart, which speaks, we have a prayer which calls, which says, "You spoke and the gum tree grew," and like the rock at the heart of our land, you are a rock. So I think for Christians, there is some real sense in which we feel ourselves able to step into the invitation of not a first step and not another first step, but a step which has some grace. And that's, for me, really tied up in how it is that I experience grace from Aboriginal people who take the time to allow me to listen and to hear and to learn, and who exercise such amazing patience alongside my floundering. And there's a way in which I think the Statement from the Heart is a spiritual invitation which will, for me, lead us further in a journey together, not be another kind of first moment, another first statement or first step. And that statement, which we've had a few years to sit with now and to study. If you're part of the Anglican Church, you've had opportunities to study it and to consider how it is with the way that we understand our faith. And that's been a very, very helpful thing. So for me, it sits right in the who we are today, and sits, I think, with that invitation to voice, which is another word really that we use for that means vocation. So what's the call to you? What's the call to live out? And if the call to live out is to take more steps, deepening steps in being alongside and learning together, then that's for me part of where I've come to where I've come.
Thank you. Jim, talking of steps, the apology which was meant to be given in 97 and was given in 2007, how impactful was that? We talk about the voice being both acknowledgement and representation. In terms of acknowledgement, is it something that is profound? When the apology was given, or is that just a fantasy of a non-Indigenous person like me?
I think you're right, it was a fantasy. When the apology was given, it opened up a lot of wounds for damaged people. Because whilst we thought it was a very historical occasion, it was hollow in that broader Australia didn't understand what it was about. Did they know that 100,000 children were removed over many generations? Did they know that? And it plays out further. The Royal Commission into child sex against kiddies, historical child sex abuse. There were 30,000 victims recorded at the end of September. 30,000. 36% of those were Aboriginal. We're less than 4% of the population. So think about that for a moment. 62% were men, 45% were people with disabilities. We heard that in 97 when the Bringing Them Home report was tabled, of how much abuse. Now it carries out even further. The Royal Commission into aged care services. I refuse to call it aged care. I want it to be elder care. You know, the scathing report was that 27 out of 100 white people get a service, residential or in-home. 17 out of 100 Aboriginal people get a service, as I say, residential or in-home. You know, someone to take you shopping or mop your floor or take you to your bank. In Perth and Bunbury, it's less than 9 in 100. And what has come out of that was, with the aged care services, Aboriginal people now are eligible for aged care services when they turn 50. What sort of an indictment on our world is that? And then we go back to aged care services. I hate to say this, but 1/3 of the aged care services in this country are run by churches. So why would I put my 96-year-old mum into a church-run aged care service? She's currently living in a hall in Prior. So the issues there are way more extensive than just that removal. The apology, I went to the 15th anniversary just back in February. And you know, after the apology, they had the Close the Gap implementation plan. You know what the priority was for Australia? Water. Nothing to do with supporting the services around redress. And I've given you those frightful figures. Nothing to give support to all the stolen people who are now eligible. Every stolen person in this country are now eligible for aged care services. No mention of support services for stolen people. It was the anniversary of the apology. So when that statement was made 15 years ago, I said to myself, what was he thinking? What was Rudd thinking? No public awareness around it. So what did people understand about the apology? Really? What do you really understand about the history of Aboriginal Australians? About the many massacres, the stolen wages that you've mentioned? Why am I telling adults what has happened to my community? Why am I going to universities to tell university people their history? So whilst the apology was good, one of the recommendations that came out of the Bring Them Home report, it was quite damaging, and nothing's happened since. We're just hearing more about the sexual abuse. Many people every week tell me what happened to them in these places. I'm going crazy thinking about it. So the apology, sorry, it was a fantasy.
Thank you for that. Steve, when we listen to all of these layers and the role of politics along the history, of course, as you mentioned, there have been many, many attempts by both sides of Parliament to bring in either some recognition or more in our Constitution, from John Howard in 2007 all the way through to the current government in 2022. But are you sorry that politics has actually taken such a front running in this debate, or do you think that that was appropriate?
The hard bit is that it's very hard to get politics out of anything. I mean, where your kids go to school is a political decision. Where your buses run is a political decision. The services you receive are a political decision. One of the reasons some of us get into politics is we recognise that there's politics in everything. There's politics in churches. There's politics in Aboriginal organisations and non-Aboriginal organisations. There's factions and divisions for all of it. I mean, we're human beings, so that all of these things exist, and they will always exist. And again, I find myself agreeing with Jim most of the night. I think having a single unified voice for Aboriginal people is as ridiculous as having a single unified voice for the rest of us. It can't be. Where I grew up in central Queensland, the Murray people would have a different point of view to the Noongar people and the Nang people, all that. So a single voice, I absolutely agree with that. So it's hard to get the politics out of that. But there's two components to this. There's the politics, which should play the minimalist role here. So this is actually, in my view, this is not a political debate so much as it is then about the, it's a service delivery outcome-based argument. And so to me, the question is not what your politics is, and there will be groups of people who are fiercely political on both sides. Sorry, wave my hands around. But this is about then, is this the best service delivery model that you can deliver for the outcomes that you want to get to? And again, I'm agreeing with Jim again. I think, you know, the apology was somewhat symbolic. Now, unfortunately, sometimes symbolism is important, and I think it was important for us to go through that symbolism. I mean, we're sitting here in a church, and if you can't support symbolism in a church, I'm not sure where you can. So I think it was important. Perhaps it was more important for non-Aboriginal people than Aboriginal people, but that's okay. Like that's still a symbolic. But Jim is right. That's not the outcomes-based thing that you want to get to. And again, I come back to this argument: is with the people that say the voice is powerless, it's symbolic. Well, if it's symbolic, then it's useless. So it is obviously either useless or it's not symbolic. And if it's not symbolic, you need to know the details to know whether it can deliver the things that I think we've all been talking about tonight. And that is why there's a huge question mark about the voice and the referendum. And that's why if it fails on Saturday, it depends whether you believe the polls. I think the referendum itself is the only poll that matters. Mind you, politicians always say that. But if it fails, it will be because that detail about how, if it's not just going to be symbolic, if it's not just another apology, then we want to know, the people want to know, and everybody has a right. I mean, Aboriginal people want to know, and those that don't support the voice are arguing that it won't deliver those outcomes. And more Aboriginal people support the voice than not, but there are a lot of Aboriginal people that don't support the voice. And their argument, the ones that I've heard, is the one that says, we're not convinced that this delivers the outcomes that we're being told. And I think that's a really important message. So if the vote is no on Saturday, my view is it will be because the model that was proposed couldn't be explained and they couldn't tell people how that was going to deliver the outcomes that genuinely make a difference. And I think that's, so I'll be devastated if people sort of opt out, and I would hate to think that Jim and people like Jim would. because they'll be critically important into hopefully what comes next if it fails. If it gets up, we go down that path. If it doesn't, there's still a path. There has to be a path. It cannot be the case that if it fails on Saturday, we have no forward step to reconciliation and continued engagement with Aboriginal people and a continued focus on lifting all those things. In particular, I think the two big ones, and again, I'm quoting my friend Warren Mundine, so they always say if you want to impress people, quote people more intelligent than yourself. But economic engagement and education are the two big critical pillars in that lift. And so there has to be, if it doesn't get up on Saturday, there has to be a discussion about the next steps there. And it would be devastating if suddenly we went, well, if Australia didn't vote yes, then we stop. That would be the worst outcome for everybody, Aboriginal Australia and non-Aboriginal Australia.
I suspect, Jim, after 50 years, if it doesn't get up on Saturday, your response will be, I'm tired.
Look, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'm meeting a politician. He was the same politician that worked with the late Rob Riley, did a thesis on stolen generation peoples. I'm going to be talking to him at 9 o'clock tomorrow about compensation for West Australian stolen people. There's 2 states left, part of the recommendation of the Bring Them Home report. Tony Booty worked with us. So what is his view tomorrow going to be? Is his personal, private view going to be of interest? It's a political move, isn't it? He belongs to a political party. I'm also chair of the West Australian First Nation Advocacy Alliance, concerned about our children being locked up in adult prisons. And I want to meet with someone who invented a paper called Justice Reinvestment. He's in government now. I wonder if he wants to meet with me and talk about justice reinvestment. I bet not. Because political parties are political parties. It's not what Steve thinks, it's what his party thinks, surely. Steve, if you thought seriously about this, would you be saying what you're saying? I'm just wondering, thinking that it's sad that we've got these really honest dinkum people who've made some real good contribution as politicians. Now they're in power. Oh, come on, will that change things? I hope so. Wish me good luck tomorrow when I meet with Pooty.
Now, we have actually gone over time a little bit, I'm sorry, but we do want to hear from questions from the floor. We have 2 roving microphones, so please do just put up your hand and wait till a microphone comes to you, which is on its way up the back there on the aisle. Thank you. And then next down the front. Thank you very much.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. I've got a loud voice anyway, so yeah. So I didn't get everyone's name just because I came in a little bit late. Could I please get everyone's name?
Steve, Narelle, Archbishop Kay, and Jim.
Awesome. Thank you. Pleasure to meet you. My question specifically to Steve, as someone that also studies law. Considering that the High Court and the Interstate Commerce Commission was put in the Constitution without detail when the Constitution was first made, my first part of my question is, your high esteem and respect for the High Court, is that diminished or flawed because it was put in the Constitution without detail and entrusted to Parliament to create? And my second question is, because it was given that flexibility, which then allowed the High Court to determine, its role compared to the other courts, as well as choosing judges and whatnot through the Parliament, do you not think that's benefited the High Court over time, and hence will also benefit the voice?
So it's a really good question. I mean, the High Court is described in the Australian Constitution, but you're right, the technical detail isn't there. The difference, I would say, is that the High Court's role, if you read the Constitution, is to interpret the Constitution primarily. Now, I don't think it always does necessarily a good job at that. And there have been High Court judges. Well, funnily enough, Michael Kirby is a High Court judge, for example, I thought initially misinterpreted the Constitution, but his later years I thought was very good. So I think there are variations with judges' interpretation of that. But the High Court itself is recognised as the institution that interprets the Constitution for all people, and I think that's the difference. So it is not in the High Court. There's no difference in the High Court if you go as an Aboriginal person who's 60, I can work it out, whatever it is, 100 generations Australian versus someone who's 4 generations Australian versus someone who immigrated and became an Australian citizen 6 weeks ago. And I think that is the difference. So the High Court, and it's obvious because it's based on the system in the UK. It's based on their High Court system. Now, not everything that came from Britain was perfect, I've got to say. And so there's errors in that process as well. So it's not perfect, but it was based on a very known product, the High Court. It was based on the High Court of Britain. In fact, the High Court of Britain ultimately, in its earlier stages, remember we could be overridden by the British Parliament into the 20th century. So it developed, it grew, but it started with that basic principle of universal equality for all people who were Australian citizens, and that's not what the Voice is proposing. So it is a very different system to the proposal of the High Court.
There was a question here at the front.
Yeah, and once again it's directed to Steve. When you said about quoting people that are smarter than you, today I heard Senator Pat Dobson speak. He gave his speech to the press club, and he was more or less countering back to Jacinta Price. I can't pronounce her middle name. Yeah. And he said, if we're living in paradise, why is there such high rate of Indigenous young people committing suicide? About the mental health, about domestic violence. All of those issues tell you that her words are incorrect. And the other thing is that Noel Pearson said, he was asked early on about division, and he said, First Nations people are not in the Constitution, so the division's right there. They haven't been included. So.
Okay, well, I'm probably going to disagree with you on both of those points. Senator Price's middle name is Nampajimpa, but you don't have to use it. That's fine. She's happy to be called Jacinta, so that's fine. She's done an enormous amount of work personally around Alice Springs to lift Aboriginal people, to assist, to help. And she very strongly takes the view that that's what's required, that the Voice is actually a problem. Now, she has a different point of view to the other people that you mentioned, and I don't dismiss either side of these arguments. I take them on board, I assess them. I don't think that there's complete right and complete wrong. And Pat Dodson, bless him, he's unwell at the moment, I think, but he's a very intelligent man as well. They have different views of this, and both views are valid and important, and I'm not dismissing either one. But I think you're wrong to dismiss Jacinta Price's position. I think hers is equally valid. Her history, and like I say, I wish she was here to speak to you, because probably that would have more emphasis than me. But I've spoken to her, I've met with her and with Warren and others, and I think you need to listen to all of those, including those that raise those concerns. So what was the second part of your statement? Oh, yeah, okay. Well, that's right. So there was obviously a pickup. Now, there were Aboriginal citizens before the 1967 referendum, by the way. It actually started early in that. So they weren't specifically excluded, but they weren't specifically included. And the joy of the 1967 referendum, which 90% of Australians voted for, in favour of, was to specifically include Aboriginal people, that the federal Parliament could make laws for Aboriginal people. So that, I mean, it was a critically important step, and nobody should underestimate that. But so Aboriginal people now, under the Constitution, have effectively equal rights with everybody else in the Constitution. What they haven't got is equal outcomes. And again, we're back to this argument that the proposal so there's an equal right for representation, there's an equal right, and there are lots of people, Aboriginal people, go to Canberra to lobby for outcomes. So they have equal rights to do all of those things. What's not equal is the outcomes. And it's very difficult in some circumstances to deliver those outcomes. So, I mean, here's an interesting thing. Yeah, sure, okay. Yeah, sure.
And
Can I just make a
thank you. Yeah, Narelle, do.
couple of comments? Firstly, Jacinta Price, I think, speaks for Jacinta Price. I think if you generally speak to most Aboriginal people across the country, we're generally bewildered and alarmed at what comes out of her mouth. And so is her own community.
Sorry, because we're doing this to YouTube, unless you've got the microphone, people won't be able to hear you.
And usually if Jacinta's addressing a group of non-Indigenous Australians, they're not necessarily, when talking about the voice, going to challenge the only Aboriginal voice in the room. But what also Jacinta Price talks about is that we need local and regional voices. And she's saying, well, not a bureaucracy. The word bureaucracy is at complete odds with how we make decisions as Aboriginal people. We make decisions collectively for each other, for the good of each other, for the good of everybody. And so it just, she, and as Jim said, not one person, not one Aboriginal person represents the views of all Aboriginal people. That's, you know, that's given. But, and I agree with you, the fact that we're voting on a principle at the moment, and all of the detail, it comes later. What the really great thing about this, though, is that having that in the Constitution means that as we are trying to refine it, unlike ATSIC, it's like, nope, let's just get rid of it. Even after a review that the government did and said, well, this is really important, we need to keep ATSIC. We need to fix these little things, but we need to keep it. It's an important part of Australia. And it was gone. So there was no opportunity and no accountability to stick with it and make it better. And that's the really great thing about having the voice enshrined in the Constitution, is that now we have the time and the space to talk to everybody that needs to be spoken to and continue to refine that model that has not yet been developed, that will be developed by all parties in Parliament, and then we're able to just continue to move on from there. So that's...
Now, I did promise the Archbishop we'd be out of the Cathedral at 8:15, which is right now. Is there any chance there's a quick question and a quick answer to finish off?
I hope so, but it's really to all the panel. I've heard the metaphor road to reconciliation used a couple of times this evening, and it seems to me that the referendum on Saturday is a product of a road to reconciliation that we have been on, particularly since the Uluru Statement from the Heart and then what led up to the Uluru Statement of the Heart. So this is a result of a process. Now, if the referendum is defeated on Saturday, where is the road to reconciliation? Is that a roadblock? What does the road to reconciliation mean on Sunday?
Would each of you just like to have one sentence on that, or is that unrealistic?
That's a fantasy.
It's fantasy again. I've confessed I live in fantasy already, Jim.
Look, I think, I worry because the crimes around Stolen Generation were crimes against our women, my mother, my grandmother, her mother. And in the last month, there's been evidence that Aboriginal women in the Northern Territory are 13 times more likely to be killed by domestic violence than white women. Now that worries me. That worries me. That we aren't portraying the truth about what has happened in that neck of the woods. So to me, there needs to be more dialogue, and every person I speak to, you know, there's some goodwill there that people say, yes, I know what you're talking about now. But certainly Steve has also said prior to 67 we allowed citizenship. My dad was allowed citizenship because he came home and he was fighting for this country. But being the oldest of 23, he had to deny his Aboriginality, couldn't speak his language, and couldn't see his family. Genocide yet perpetrated some more. You had removal of children. The late Ron Wilson, the Dobson, they said it was genocide. So, well, you can't speak your language now, you're a citizen. You can be a good little white fella now. So, you know, these sorts of things you don't hear about. And the thing that's important about this, Aboriginal people don't know their history either, because it's not taught in schools.
Archbishop Kay, we began with you, and I would like to finish returning to you. Is there any comment that you would like to make just about how we have made our way through this evening's discussion?
I have, yeah, Ian's looking at me. I've been thinking both about the impact of the history which brings us to this particular moment, considering the fact that, as I hear it, what's proposed may not be perfect, but there is no other proposal. Has there been another proposal? So this, to me, is a gateway to another way of walking. And I used the word about paternalism earlier, and with goodwill in many instances, and I figure it still, lives a fair bit in the environment that I'm part of. But I think agency and partnership are two things that we need to be moving more closely towards. And I'm liking the idea of Makarata as I've been hearing it, of the coming together after a struggle and finding the ways. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you very much. We've gone over time. Thank you so much for being such an attentive audience. I think we need to thank all of our panellists for bringing their heartfelt and well thought out perspectives on this referendum, which we will all know the answer to by Sunday.
And just on behalf of everyone here and everyone watching on YouTube, thank you very much, panel. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I've really enjoyed the spirit in which it's been undertaken. I think it's a slightly different spirit to what we often see in the media. So thank you very much for the respect and the information you've shown. We've got superb panel members. Again, just Jim Morrison, Archbishop Kay Goldsworthy, Narelle Henry, Dr. Steve Thomas, and our amazing facilitator, Miriam Borthwick. Thank you so much. Would you give them a final round of applause? And thank you all for being here. If you'd like to support our big conversations, we have, you can tap something as you go and give a financial donation, and then maybe we can look forward to our future and next important conversation. Thank you all very much for coming.
How many people would you say that is?